Good morning, everybody. How are we doing? My name is Scott. That down there is Beauregard Blue Creighton. And blue stands for Blue Devils, since he's now a fan of the Duke Blue Devils basketball team. As well he should be. How are you doing? By the way, I said that I stand with the Creighton basketball team. They were doing okay. They lost. However, the women's team just made it to the Sweet 16 this past weekend. Good for them. They are an 11 seed, beat a 2 seed. So good for them. I'll be watching them as well, and got my fingers crossed for them. How are you guys doing? Today is the 22nd day of March 2022. It is a nice day down here in Tampa, Florida, and the time is about 8:11. About, roughly, 8:11 and 38 seconds on a Tuesday afternoon, well, Tuesday morning. Tucker Carlson. Karina Malatesta, at Malatesta Karina, posted this video of good old Tucker Carlson. This will be the first video I make today. The second video is going to be about the passage of time. But this video is about controlled opposition and the power of it. Tucker Carlson is allowed to continue on Fox for a reason. And I'm going to share that reason with you right now. Believe it or not, in spite of the fact that Tucker supposedly promotes conspiracy theories and talks about election system rigging and vaccine mandates and things like that, he still serves a very valuable purpose, and possibly more valuable to the propaganda spewing, establishment supporting reporters on his own network, like Fox and Friends and Sean Hannity and others, but also certainly more valuable to the establishment than the people on The View and the people on CNN, the people on fucking MSNBC, because he serves a function that they cannot, which is to reinforce the important establishment positions to those folks who have seen through the bullshit and the propaganda coming out of MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, and all the rest, NPR and all the rest. He's still able to do that. He's still able to make sure that the important positions, the important establishment positions, are well ingrained in his viewing audience. And I'm going to show you exactly what I'm talking about. Hopefully, Karina here watches this video. Let's start off with something that he talked about, that I talked about just the other day on the 20th. He talked about it last night on the 21st. And it comes from articles like this one. It's well understood. When it first came out, only a few underground publications had it, hence the Free Press Journal here. But because the speech that Zelensky gave was broadcast, eventually all the mainstream media had to pick up on it. This is what I talked about the other day when I mentioned the fact that he had shut down 10 left-wing opposition political parties, making any activity by them illegal. Probably at this point running around and arresting opposition members. If you guys don't know, this is something that we've done when we've regime changed countries for decades. When we installed the Shah, his secret police, Savak, did this. When we installed Pinochet in 73, September 11th, 1973, his people did this. In some cases, I think it was in Argentina, don't quote me on that, but the fucking secret police were putting people, left-wing opposition leaders and union leaders and union organizers and people like that, and journalists, in helicopters, handcuffed, flying them out 3 or 4 miles off the coast and pushing them out the helicopters. We've done this before. This is nothing new, which is something that is an aspect of Tucker Carlson's story that is missing. And it's deafening in its silence. But let's have a listen to old Tucker here for a second, shall we?
Is the hallmark of it. In a democracy, citizens can have any opinion they want to have. They can express any opinion they want in public whenever they care to express it, including through mass media. If citizens are dissatisfied with their political leadership, they can challenge their leaders for office. Now, all of these things...
Now, he's going to explain to you in a few seconds, after he talks about what Zelensky does, is that, listen, we got to be careful because we're the shining city on the hill. We're a beacon of democracy. And if we're not careful, we can start slipping down that fucking slippery slope and end up in a situation where, well, I don't know, Zelensky resigns. This is what I'm talking about. 2007, I wrote an article, and this is it no longer exists online. But luckily for me, someone, my mother, wanted to take and make a recorded history of the stuff that I was writing. And so she started setting up this archive for me. It is one of several legacies that she left me that are invaluable to me. Listen to this. Talking about Charlie Crist, this is 2007, talking about Charlie Crist's election in Florida. The second of Crist's promises to get elected, as a response to the humiliation we all felt in 2000 and 2004 elections, was to bring a system-wide election rehab with paper trail creating balloting. It was a huge part of his campaign that made a lot of people here feel he could be trusted. 3 weeks ago, the state quietly announced that due to budget constraints, they would not be able to implement this program, and indeed, they ordered thousands of standard paperless e-voting machines, just in time to get them set up before primaries and elections in 2008. An election in 2008 that promised to be very important to the situation in Iraq. Now we'll get back to more of that I wrote before. Let's take that into consideration. Let's take all the stuff that we know about electronic voting machines, the fact that many of our allies, our partners in democracy across the world, refuse to use them because they know how easily they can be manipulated via their own codes or via hacking from inside, from outside because they're online, or from the old man-in-the-middle plan, which you can look that up. Man-in-the-middle 2004 election, Ohio. Be my guest. Guy who worked for Karl Rove helped steal the 2004 election. Then he was killed on the way back from New York flying a plane. Perhaps not a coincidence, Karl Rove bragged after that about the new permanent Republican majority in terms of voting in the United States. What did he just say? What did he just tell you? He just told you that we have to be able to maintain the freedom to vote for whoever you want to. No, you can't. You can't. Because they rig elections in the primaries via electronic voting machines. You vote, you hold your nose and vote. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. How many times you heard that? We don't have free and open elections in this country. And if perhaps you disagree with me and you're on the right because I mentioned 2004, 2000, the election rigging that took place there, the Help America Vote Act, Karl Rove, man in the middle. If perhaps you say to me, Scott, that's crazy, you're fucking one-sided, I offer you up 2016. 2016 where you had, and 2020 where you had clear problems with the election and the counting and the vote counting. But also in 2016, you had Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton using our Central Intelligence Agency and our other intelligence agencies and the FBI to directly spy on an opposition candidate. After she stole the fucking nomination from the people who voted for and supported Bernie Sanders. And this man sits there and tells you with a straight face that we got to be careful. We're going to go down that slippery slope to where Zelensky is. Boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, we are down in the fucking hole and we're pulling Zelensky down with us. And that's a fact. But this is not exactly what I'm talking about. Part of it, but not exactly. But you see what I mean. He's trying to reinforce the official narrative that the election system here is good. The election system here works when clearly it doesn't, and it hasn't for quite a long time.
Things are true in every free country in any period, always. These are not just features of democracy, these are prerequisites for democracy.
True.
So with that in mind, you should know about a political party in Ukraine called Opposition Platform for Life. With 43 seats in parliament, it is the largest opposition party in that country. Over the weekend, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, banned that party. Opposition Platform for Life is now prohibited from, quote, all activity within Ukraine. So with a single command, Zelensky made it impossible for anybody to run against him for president. He did this not just to Opposition Platform for Life, but to 10 other political parties that he believed were insufficiently loyal to him. They're all illegal now. Obviously, there's a war underway in Ukraine, and on that basis, Zelensky has declared martial law. But we must tell you there is no evidence that the opposition parties he banned were aiding Russia in its war against Ukraine. Opposition Platform for Life, for example, denounced the Russian invasion the moment it happened, just like everybody else. But Zelensky took the opportunity to turn Ukraine into effectively a one-party state, which it now is. So having banned all opposition, he then seized control of the country's media outlets. Zelensky signed a decree that combines all national television channels into a single platform that he controls. He described this as a, quote, unified information policy, and it certainly is unified. So if all of these details seem shocking to you, if this is not the Zelensky you've heard about on the Today Show, then you may not have been paying attention to Ukraine. Zelensky has been solidifying complete control over Ukraine for a long time, since long before the Russian invasion and the war. Last year, he had his main political opponent arrested and his assets seized by the state. At the same time, Zelensky shut down 3 of Ukraine's most popular television networks, channels that, not coincidentally, had criticized him.
His point is he's going to come to the point where he says,
so how should we as Americans assess this? Well, first, most obviously, by admitting this is authoritarianism, it's not democracy, and then second, by acknowledging that actually it's pretty common around the world. Even in 2022, real democracy is a rare thing anywhere. Most countries are still governed by some variety of dictatorship, whatever they may call it, and that includes close American allies. The kingdoms of Jordan and Saudi Arabia come to mind, but there are others. We're not moralizing about this, by the way. Obviously, we'd prefer democracy everywhere, in every country. But as Americans, it's probably a waste of time to get too involved in the internal affairs of other countries. They're hard to change. What we care about, what all Americans should care about, is what happens here in the United States. The United States is, despite the fact it's also a bumper sticker, doesn't make it untrue, is a beacon of hope and freedom to the rest of the world.
A beacon of hope and freedom to the rest of the world. We have the most people of any nation, by far. Even nations that have 3-4 times our population, we have more people in prisons right now. Some of those prisons run for a profit by private institutions. You talk about silencing opposition and voices that stand in opposition. What's happening now in terms of what we say or what we think about what's going on in Ukraine? You're called a fucking Putin apologist, a Putin fucking asset. You're called a Russian fucking bot. Twitter is removing any information whatsoever about what Zelensky and the Ukrainian military and the Azov battalion are doing to their own fucking people. They're removing it. But we're a beacon for freedom and democracy to the rest of the world. Really? Remember back in the day when we were leading up to the illegal invasion of Iraq in 2002 and 2003? What did fucking Bill O'Reilly come out and spout and spew and screech on television? He said almost verbatim, at a time of war, if you can't support the president, you just shut the fuck up. And I added the F word. But that was Bill O'Reilly. Prime time. And a lot of people down here in fucking Tampa where I live, they were 100% behind that. They were militant. You couldn't possibly say anything about no weapons of mass destruction, no yellow cake from Niger, no nuclear weapons, no connection between Assad and fucking the attackers of 9/11. Couldn't say any of that. You shut up. So much so that Phil Donahue was kicked off fucking MSNBC. It wasn't just Fox. It was all of them. Remember the Dixie Chicks? Whatever happened to them? He talks about Zelensky setting up an authoritarian system. That's interesting. Authoritarian means basically dictatorship. Do any of you remember Dick Cheney coming out and proposing the idea of the unitary executive? Do you guys remember that? The unitary executive is our or his version of dictatorship. During a time of war, you need one person, one man making all the decisions, and you shouldn't worry about what the Congress did or didn't do. How many times during the Bush-Cheney days was someone subpoenaed to come testify before Congress and they said no? They just never showed up. And they were never fucking charged. They were never fucking brought by force to testify before Congress. When the president had to testify about what he knew going into September 11th and all of that, he had Dick Cheney sitting with him. And they had stipulations. One was nobody could write anything down, nobody could record anything. The other was they weren't sworn in to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. That's us. The shining city on the hill. That's where we are. Remember how many, when they were talking about the surge in 2005, they wanted to bring more troops, even though my own father, because of what Bush and Cheney did, my own father, who had voted Republican his whole fucking life, in 2004, for the first time in his life, didn't vote for the Republican candidate, which was George Bush and Dick Cheney. Depends on who you are, whether you believe who was in charge, but there you go. But he flat out refused. Because even though he supported shit in 2002, and didn't want to hear lip from me about the problems with all the stories changing for the justification to go to war, he finally came to understand it was about something totally different. And having been a career military person, he didn't like seeing all these guys, these young people, these soldiers, being killed for nothing. So in 2005, when they pushed the fucking surge, it was unpopular as shit, even with military commanders. So what did the unitary executive do? They fired him. Remember that? What the fuck is he talking about? The shining city on the hill, a beacon of hope and democracy to the rest of the world. Is he out of his fucking mind? Patriot Act, Military Commissions Act, the NDAA 2012. Our freedom and democracy has been eroded and eroding for a very long time. But of course, to him, quiet. It's what's happening with Zelensky. That's the issue. From 2007, quote, "We all know what Roe said about permanent Republican majority and some of the actions with the fired U.S. attorneys. That was part of the plan to see that through. So much so that Attorney General of the U.S. has lied and avoided answering questions before a congressional hearing. Harriet Miers didn't even show up. Subpoenas have been ignored at the request of the White House, and executive privilege has been claimed, even though the White House is not supposed to have been involved at all." And what is the intent? The list of these issues and examples of actions taken to thwart legislative oversight is way too long for me to address all of them. From Cheney's refusal to release information kept by the Secret Service about who we met with before 9/11, to his creation of a new classification system, from the Patriot Act being dusted off and plopped on the desks of the legislators the night before signing of the Military Commissions Act, suspending the writ of habeas corpus, from the declaration of Cheney's position is the fourth branch of government, to the executive privilege claim that freezes investigations into what the White House knew about the death of Pat Tillerman before Bush recruitment drive speech. Finally, the very last example, and perhaps the most troubling, is the administration's push towards war with Iraq. My point is simple. While he's pointing at a government that we put in place with our fucking soft power, special operations, use of proxy army, in this case, neo-Nazi proxy army in Ukraine. While he's pointing out legitimate concerns that I pointed out not that long ago, he's failing to tell you that we shouldn't be concerned that in time we might look like this. The reality is we're remaking fucking Ukraine in our image. The same thing we've done with nation states across the fucking globe for decades. And it's an important distinction. It's not hating on America. These motherfuckers, they're not America. We are. The people out there are. You are. It's not hating America. It's not hating our fucking history. It's being realistic. It's being honest. The first step in fixing any problem is recognizing you have one. And if you keep pretending you don't, even though obviously you do, then you're not doing anybody any good. A lie of omission is still a fucking lie. Now let's get to the more obvious lies. regarding Ukraine.
These people. So the man who just declared himself king is actually the world's newest George Washington. Okay. So you could be deeply concerned and deeply saddened, outraged by what's happening to Ukrainians without saying things like that. Because it's absurd. It's a lie. That's the word from Senator Ben Sasse of Nebraska, a Republican. And again, on one level, you can understand why people are whipped into an emotional frenzy when they talk about Ukraine. Why wouldn't they be? Russia's invasion of Ukraine was shocking. It was wrong. The suffering of civilians there is entirely real. We're watching it on TV. It's horrifying. So it's entirely natural to root for the Ukrainians to expel the invaders, and obviously we are rooting for them to expel the invaders, Russia.
This is the second point I'm going to make here, and this is the last point I'm going to make here. Everyone, no matter who you're talking to, with few exceptions, there are a couple of exceptions, myself being one, will always ignore the history that led up to Russia attacking Azov battalion forces and some Ukrainian military forces in Ukraine. They will always forget that history that led up to it. It's just Russia invaded Ukraine like we invaded Iraq. Few people will try to make that connection, but then when you get down to talking to people who are informed, they will make that connection. And they'll say, you can't say America's bad for invading Iraq and then say Russia's not bad for invading Ukraine. It's the exact same thing. No, it isn't. It isn't. I need to go to full screen for the rest of this so you can have a basic understanding. This is, of course, the Ukraine conflict map. And it shows you on a daily basis where various events take place. In this case, bombings or video or fire. We'll get back to this. I asked this thing. I'll do it again so you guys can hear it. Hang on a second. And just so you know, I'm not making this up. Let me go back to that. Hang on a second. It's not Siri. I'm not cool enough to have an Apple. How many civilians have been killed by Russia in Ukraine?
Here is information from Wikipedia.
Oh, it told me before. No, that's wrong. Let's try that again. It's giving me everybody from 2014. Let's try it again. How many civilian casualties have been killed by Russia in Ukraine?
Here is information from Wikipedia.
Oh, you goddamn fuckwit. It gave me the right thing last time. Civilian casualties in the Ukraine-Russian conflict. And it's not going to tell me. Sorry. It told me before 900. Right now, they claim 900. But they don't tell you in the article that they shared with me who killed whom. They just say there's been 900 and something civilian casualties of this conflict. I think this. No. Okay. We'll start with this. According to the Wikipedia And this is taken straight from the United Nations numbers, up to date. Well, to January 31st. So it wasn't, no. Right, till January 31st, before the Russian invasion, quote unquote. Civilian fatalities in Donbass, 3,393 civilians killed. Now this shows you here other numbers of combatants and other people. But in Donbass, the number of civilians killed between 2014 and 2021, January of 2021, which is long before the invasion, there were 3,393 killed. This article from TASS puts that number even lower, and that's the Russian version. And that's 2,600 civilians died in Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics over the past 8 years. That's even lower than the UN's estimate. Let's go back to what actually started this whole thing off. Around the 22nd, 23rd of February, Russia recognized the independence of Ukraine and the separatist regions because they had asked them to. There was an uptick in violence being exerted on the people in the Donbass regions, the separatist regions. And that's mentioned right here. This is from DW, which is mainstream Germany publication. It says Monday's developments came amid an uptick in violence in the long-running conflict between Ukrainian troops and pro-Russian rebels, in which 3,393 civilians had been killed, just in the Donbass region alone. This is Secretary Blinken on February 16th, stating that the Russian parliament had sent a request to Putin to honor the request of the Donbass region to recognize their sovereignty and independence. This is from NBC, talking about, which one is this? Oh, well, we'll get to that in a second. All right, so that's the time frame. The timeline. Around the 16th, 17th, they asked to be recognized, and they are recognized by Russia's parliament. They vote, they have a vote, they recognize them, and then on the 20th, 21st, Putin actually signs it, recognizing their independence and suggesting that Ukraine should stop fucking shelling them. Now, why? What led to that? Well, one thing that led to that is, despite appeals from Ukraine, Biden administration holds back additional military aid to Kiev. That was in December, mid-December, December 10th. And they said they weren't going to give them a $200 million military aid package because they were going to wait until Russia invaded to give them a larger package, which they did do. On February 26th, Biden approved a $350 million aid package to Ukraine. This was January 19th, 2022. The U.S. will provide a $200 million military aid package to Ukraine. That was from NPR, but they hadn't yet. Why? Because they were waiting. They were holding back and waiting until Russia invaded, and then they would give them $390 million aid package. Does that make sense? You with me so far? They had been able to justify doubling that 200 simply by waiting until Russia invaded. What prompted the Russian invasion. Now I'm going to go to this again. This is, again, the Ukraine conflict map, which you can pull up. It's live. And I've gone back into the time section here. And we've gone back to February the 5th. Look at the conflict. Ah, God damn it. I forgot that mouse button doesn't do that on this. Very little. And these are a drone armed with a grenade crashed. So this is a media, a PR stunt thing outlet. This is some kind of fire, and this is a video. YouTube has blocked official channels of occupied authorities. YouTube blocked the official channels of occupied authorities. Why? Why? Because they knew something was coming. What was coming? That's the 5th. Very little happening. Here's the 6th. Very little happening. But here's some bombings that start taking place. Here's the 7th. More bombings. The 8th. A few more bombings in different locations. The 9th. Oh, look. We've got more bombings. We've got some activities taking place over here. The 10th. The 11th. Oh. Well, we're steadily increasing, aren't we? And we'll move all the way down to the 15th. And 16th. And 17th. And this should be where it kicks off. Russia's parliament had voted to recognize Lugansk and Donetsk, their independence, their request for independence. Because they were being shelled, they were being bombed. Up until that point, 3,393 people, according to the UN, civilians have been killed in the Donbass regions, which is what's highlighted in red there, by their own fucking government. 3,393. To put that into perspective, that's about 393 more people that died than died on September 11th. And so they kick off a massive increase in bombings. The Ukrainian government on their own fucking people, which continued, and continued, and continued. Look at that. What they were doing was baiting Russia into having to fucking do something to stop that massive increase in attacks on civilian and military structures in Donbass region. Without a doubt. They did what they had to do. These are Russian, ethnic Russians in Ukraine. Russian-speaking citizens in Ukraine. There are many more in fucking throughout Western Ukraine. And in fact, the reason Zelensky came to power was because he promised, just like Charlie Crist did, he made a promise too, but didn't fulfill it. Zelensky made a promise to fix relations with Moscow and to reincorporate, to fix the Donbass and the ethnic Russians in the Donbass region, bring them back into the fold. Not through violence, but through acceptance. We have to heal were all Ukrainians. And this is what his response is. This is what he actually does. But he won in a landslide, and they couldn't even vote over here. And that idea won in a landslide in the rest of Ukraine. But this is what they got. Just like people elected Charlie Crist because he promised for paper trail machines that could be used the paper, the receipt, to check and make sure it was what you voted for. You put it in the fucking box. Off you go. If there's a question, we can check the ballots. Nope. Gone. This is the reality. This is also the reality. We sent Blackwater mercenaries along with special operations forces into Ukraine months and months prior to this in order to fucking train these guys to fight Russians because Russia is going to invade, or to fight the people in Donetsk and Lugansk. We did this. We prompted Zelensky and Azov and the other neo-Nazi factions and their National Guard and their military to attack Donbass in order to prompt a response from Russia that we could then use to justify what's going on now. And the attacks, not necessarily on Russia, but the attacks on the Russian people in the form of sanctions and all the other restrictions, in order to hopefully make their economy scream to get people pissed off at Putin. Didn't work. Didn't work. Usually it doesn't. But that was the plan. Who was it? Was it Ted Cruz who recently said that what we really need is someone to kill fucking Putin, just to step up and kill Putin for the good of humanity. And this ties into my video that I'm going to do a little bit later on about why they need Russia out of the way, why they want to break up Russia. But make no mistake, make absolutely no mistake, this man is not telling you the whole truth, the entire truth. He's still not only trying to convince people that we're that beacon of fucking light and freedom of democracy and not rigged elections for the world to see. We're still that beacon, which we aren't and haven't been for a while. We need to be afraid that we'll slip into some kind of situation like Zelensky's in. We made Zelensky. We made that situation. And all we're doing is making a smaller version of ourselves and our country and that country. And of course, his disinformation that Russia bad, Russia evil, Russia invaded for no reason. That's not what happened. That'd be like him telling you we had every fucking reason and good reason to go into Iraq in 2003. We had every good reason to go into Iraq. They had weapons of mass destruction, which they did not. But we did it for freedom and democracy. That's how disinformation works. And he is a disinfo asset, a alternative media disinfo asset on the mainstream media outlet, which tells you just how fucking big alternative media has really gotten, to be honest. But no, what he's saying about fucking Russia is absolutely not true. Russia did not invade. We're not sitting here going, oh, Russia bad, we hope Russia gets kicked out, because no, that's not what happened. Russia's trying to get the Nazis to fuck out of that country. And he's offered them, and they've offered them an outlet with 4 points. One was recognize Crimea, which they had a referendum. 2, which is recognize Donbass, the Lugansk and Donetsk republics, which they also had a referendum, and they've applied for that. 3, say no to fucking NATO membership. And 4, which means neutrality. And 4, of course, getting the Nazis out of their fucking country. He mentions McFaul in this, a tweet that McFaul sent, which is, you know, he's right to point this out. McFaul saying, you know, oh my God, they're talking about denazification of Ukraine, which actually stands for regime change. What is McFaul telling you? If the denazification of Ukraine means full regime change, who does that mean is in charge of fucking Ukraine? And why is it so important for them to get us to stand with Ukraine, meaning their Nazi government? This is the important takeaway from this. That's the important takeaway from this. That was the 21st. Russia didn't get involved to the 24th. Didn't fucking start launching attacks on them to the 24th. And how could they not? Because it wasn't just one day. They continued it. And continued it. And continued it. And continued it. They weren't going to stop. I've said it before, I'll say it again. We would do nothing less if there was a situation in Mexico where they were bombing cities, towns that were predominantly fucking made up of American expats living down there, living out their lives, retired, whatever it was, and all of a sudden Mexicans said, we're going to fucking start shelling the shit out of them. You think we'd sit back and do nothing? I mean, after all, we pretended that Muammar Gaddafi was doing this to his own people, but of course he wasn't. But that was a justification for us to go, and NATO, to bomb the shit, and France to go bomb the shit out of fucking Muammar Gaddafi and bomb that fucking beautiful country back into the Stone Ages. And he wasn't actually doing it. I thank you for your time.